At Thanksgiving dinner, right after my father carved the turkey, he raised a glass and said the words that shattered my world. The company is sold, and you're getting nothing. My brother Kyle exploded. My mother quietly sipped her wine. No one looked at me, as if I didn't matter. But I smiled, not because I wasn't hurt, not because I didn't care, but because what none of them knew was this. I was the one who bought the company. And this dinner, it wasn't a goodbye. It was the start of everything they never saw coming. The dining room hadn't changed in 30 years. The same velvet curtains framed the tall bay windows, and the same brass chandelier cast warm light over the long mahogany table where family milestones had been celebrated or endured. This Thanksgiving was no different, at least in appearance. The turkey was perfectly roasted, the wine perfectly aged, and the smiles perfectly fake. I sat near the far end of the table, next to the window where, as a child, I used to press my face against the glass waiting for my father to come home from construction sites. Those were the days I thought he'd bring me with him someday. He never did. My father, Richard Rowland, stood at the head of the table, carving knife in hand. His hair had gone white, but his presence remained commanding. He looked over the table with a quiet pride, then raised his wineglass. "Before we enjoy this beautiful meal your mother worked so hard on," he began, "I have an announcement." The room fell still. My brother Kyle straightened in his chair. His wife Monica gave a small, expectant smile. I simply reached for my water and waited. "As you all know," my father continued, "Rowland Builders has been the cornerstone of this family for over 3 decades. I built it from the ground up, through sweat, sacrifice, and endless hours most of you never saw." Kyle nodded solemnly, performing reverence like an actor hitting his cues. "I have come to a decision," Dad said. "One your mother and I agree is best for our future. We've sold the company." A pause. At first, no one reacted. Then Kyle blinked hard. "Sold? What do you mean, sold?" My father set down the carving knife, folded his hands over the edge of the table. "We received an excellent offer, one that allows your mother and me to finally retire the way we've always dreamed of." "You mean you're not passing it on to us?" Monica asked, her voice tight. "No," Dad replied plainly. "Because none of you are fit to run it." The words dropped like stones. My fingers clenched slightly around my glass, but I kept my face neutral. Kyle's cheeks coloured. "Dad, what the hell are you talking about? I've worked in sales for a decade." "Selling insurance," Dad cut in, not unkindly, but firmly. "That's not construction. That's not managing crews, timelines, materials, OSHA regulations." Monica leaned forward. "We could learn. You never gave us a chance." "You never asked for one," Dad countered. "Not once. You just assumed it would be yours, an inheritance, not a responsibility." My mother, seated silently beside him, sipped her wine and avoided eye contact with anyone. "So who did you sell it to?" Kyle demanded. "Some hedge fund in New York?" My father paused, glancing briefly in my direction. So briefly I thought I imagined it. "No, a private development firm based in Dallas, Calderon Development." The name rolled off his tongue easily, too easily. Monica furrowed her brow. "Never heard of them." "They specialize in acquiring regional firms like ours. They're committed to keeping our team in place, preserving the Rowland legacy." Kyle scoffed. "And we're just, what, out? Cut off?" My father's voice was steady. "You're adults. You've made your choices. You have your lives. Rowland Builders deserves leadership that understands what it stands for, not just people who want the nameplate on a door." I could feel Kyle staring at me now. I didn't return his gaze. He was calculating, trying to find his usual target, but this time I wasn't one. I took another sip of water and listened to the silence stretching between us all. The company was gone, the legacy was sold, and according to my father, none of us had earned the right to touch it. None of them, anyway. Kyle shoved his chair back, the legs scraping harshly against the hardwood floor. "You're selling the business and we get nothing? Nothing?" "Kyle," Dad began, but Kyle's voice surged louder. "No, seriously. 30 years, Dad. 30 years of you preaching family and legacy, dragging us through every miserable Sunday dinner, only to sell it off like we're strangers. What about equity? Shares? Are you saying we don't even get a piece?" Monica had pulled out her phone. Her eyes darted across the screen, fingers tapping as if she could somehow calculate what she was losing. "If the company's worth what you've always claimed," she murmured, "then we're talking low 8 figures at least. Maybe more, depending on contracts in progress." I swirled my wine glass slowly, watching the ruby liquid curl against the crystal. My father sat still, his expression carved from stone. My mother stared at her plate as if the roasted vegetables could spare her from choosing a side. "There will be no equity split," Dad said evenly. "No payouts. The funds are going to your mother and me for our retirement. We've earned that security." Kyle laughed bitterly. "Right. Meanwhile, we're left to figure things out from scratch. Thanks, Dad." "You've had 30 years to figure things out," Dad replied. "You chose not to." I glanced at Monica's screen. She was already on Zillow, pulling up properties in Texas, probably trying to estimate which lakefront view they were supposedly giving up. "Let me guess," Kyle said, crossing his arms. "Calderon Development offered what? 30 million? 40, Dad said. 40 million even." Monica gasped. 40 million? Kyle looked like someone had punched him in the throat. "And you're keeping all of it?" "I'm retiring," Dad said simply, "and your mother and I will finally get to take that Mediterranean cruise we've postponed for 20 years. I took a long, slow sip of wine. 40 million. They had no idea. Kyle turned toward me. "And you're just sitting there? You're okay with this?" I met his eyes. "Wasn't my decision." "But you're the accountant," he snapped. "You've seen the numbers. You must have known something. Why didn't you warn us?" I shrugged. It wasn't my place. That was true, in the way that most truths hide deeper ones behind them. Kyle paced the room now, the tailored fabric of his sport coat bunching as he threw his hands up in exasperation. "This is insane. I gave up real estate leads for this family. I could have opened my own brokerage 5 years ago." "You still can," Dad replied without looking at him. Monica had stopped searching and was now whispering to Kyle, eyes darting to my father's expression, then back to the phone. She wasn't worried about legacy, she was worried about assets. Dad leaned back in his chair, took a slow sip of his own wine. "We're not debating this," he said. "The deal is done. Paperwork is in motion. Calderon Development takes ownership next quarter." Calderon Development. There it was again. I set my glass down gently, watching the rim leave a faint red ring on the linen napkin beneath it. My heart didn't race, my palms weren't sweating. I had rehearsed this moment in my head 100 times, and in every version, they never saw it coming. They still didn't. Dad added, almost as an afterthought, "They seem very professional. Financials checked out, due diligence solid. I'm confident they'll preserve the Roland name." I tilted my head slightly. They would, because I'd made sure of it. No one at the table noticed the flicker in my eyes. Not yet. Not Kyle, who was still grumbling. Not Monica, who was scrolling again. Not even my father, who had finally leaned back as though the matter was resolved. But it wasn't, because while they were busy counting what they thought they lost, they had no idea what I had already won. They're going to find out soon, I thought to myself, running a finger along the wine glass stem. And when they do, everything changes. There's a photo in my father's office, framed in brass, perfectly centred on the panelled wall behind his desk. It's taken on the construction site of his first major contract, a commercial plaza in Houston, summer of '92. Everyone is there. My father, grinning in a hard hat. My mother, beaming beside him. Kyle, barely 11, in a miniature Roland Builders polo, holding the corner of a blueprint like he had any clue what it meant. Everyone's there, except me. The edge of my arm is visible, cropped right at the shoulder. I remember that day. I'd wandered onto the site with lemonade for Dad, wearing the only tool belt I owned, plastic from a kid's workshop set. He smiled, took the drink, told me thanks, and then told me to go wait in the car. "Too dangerous," he'd said. I watched from the passenger seat while the camera flashed. No one noticed when I wasn't in the final shot. That photo has hung in his office for 30 years, and I've never once been in a single one like it. Growing up, the Rowland household operated like a business. Schedules, metrics, expectations. But not equally. Kyle was groomed. Dad took him on weekend site visits, let him watch subcontractor negotiations, gave him scaled-down blueprints to review like puzzles. Kyle soaked it up, or at least pretended to. I was 2 years younger and twice as eager, but it didn't matter. Girls didn't build. Girls didn't pour concrete or manage rebar crews. Girls stayed out of the way. When Kyle turned 16, Dad gave him a set of engraved drafting tools and a clipboard with the Rowland logo on it. When I turned 16, I got a set of monogrammed pens and a calculator. "You're so organised, Isabel," Mum had said. "You're like the brain of the family." What they meant was, you belong behind the desk. So I did the books, entered invoices, reconciled accounts, took QuickBooks courses no one asked me to take. I organised, filed, colour-coded, indexed, labelled, and I watched. I watched as Kyle grew bored with site visits. He started skipping them by senior year. By college, he declared a marketing major and barely came home, but Dad still talked like Kyle would take over the company someday. "You have to be patient with him," he'd say. "He's just finding himself." No one ever asked me what I was finding. Every holiday reminded me of my place. Thanksgiving dinners, where Kyle got praised for a podcast appearance or a half-finished ebook, while I brought cranberry sauce and wasn't asked about work. Christmas mornings when Kyle received new watches, cufflinks, first edition biographies on great businessmen. I got scented candles and spa gift cards. Once I asked Dad if I could go with him to a concrete pour downtown. I was 22, working part-time for the company while finishing my finance degree. He looked me square in the eye and said, "Isabel, you're not built for this industry." Not built, as if I were a defective beam, so I stopped asking. I took over accounts payable, then vendor relations, then forecasting. I did the financials for 2 straight years, balanced to the penny, saved the company from a tax penalty with one well-worded letter to the IRS. They said thank you. Then gave Kyle a bonus for family leadership. When I tried to sit in on a quarterly review, I was told it was above my pay grade. I started taking late shifts, Saturday mornings, any hours that kept me from hearing them say, "You're not part of this." Even the family portraits excluded me, always somehow in the background or absent altogether. A smile behind someone's shoulder, a shadow near the stairs. I became a ghost in my own history. That's why, when my father said tonight that none of us were worthy of Rowland Builders, I didn't flinch. Because for them, I was never really part of us anyway. There was one quarter, spring of 2015, when Rowland Builders was less than 2 weeks away from defaulting on a payroll line. Vendors hadn't been paid. Cash flow was strangled by 2 delayed invoices from city contracts that Kyle had failed to follow up on. Dad was out of the country at a construction expo in Munich. Kyle was consulting remotely from Palm Springs. No one was watching the books. No one but me. I remember the number exactly, 147, 315 POS 42. That's how much we needed to make payroll and avoid sending 37 construction workers home with empty envelopes. I emailed Dad, no answer. I called Kyle, straight to voicemail. So I called the bank myself. I'd spent the last 2 years building a quiet rapport with our local branch manager, knowing the company's account inside and out. I walked into his office wearing a navy blazer and carried every ledger, balance sheet and projected receivables we had. I made the case like a seasoned executive. And I got the loan. An emergency bridge, 30-day maturity, collateralized against equipment assets, a stopgap. Just enough to keep things afloat until the city finally paid out. The company never missed a paycheck. No one even noticed. The funds arrived, vendors were paid, the ship sailed on like nothing had happened. I didn't tell anyone, not at first, not until weeks later when the loan was repaid in full, and I thought maybe they'd be proud. Mum was the first to find out. "You did what?" she asked, putting down her coffee mug with a sharp clink. "I negotiated an emergency credit line," I said carefully, "to prevent a missed payroll. The city was late, and Kyle hadn't followed up on—" "You went behind your father's back?" Her voice dropped low, like I'd committed a betrayal. "I went to the bank," I corrected. "I saved the company from a public embarrassment and probably a lawsuit." She crossed her arms. "That wasn't your decision to make." I blinked.
"Then whose was it? No one else was even looking at the numbers." "That's not the point, Isabel," she snapped. "You don't involve banks without speaking to your father. That's not your role." Her words burned more than she knew. Not your role. I thought I'd proven myself. Instead, I'd crossed an invisible line. But the worst came months later. It started small. A discrepancy in project materials on a mid-sized development in Sugarland. The invoice said 30 units of steel. The delivery log said 20. And the vendor payment? Processed in full. I triple-checked, then cross-referenced the approval signatures. Kyle's initials were everywhere. So I brought it up, quietly, respectfully. A simple email to Dad and Kyle with attached documentation and a suggested reconciliation. No reply. 3 days later, I was summoned to Dad's office. He didn't even look up as I entered, just said, "We think it's time you take a step back from accounting." I stared at him. "What?" "You've done good work, but we need someone more specialized now that we're scaling operations. We've hired an outside firm." I waited for the punchline. It didn't come. Kyle was leaning against the doorframe, smirking like a man who just dodged a bullet and watched someone else take it. "I don't understand," I said. "This is about the Sugarland invoices, isn't it?" "We've already handled that," Kyle said smoothly. "It was a miscommunication with the vendor." I looked at Dad. "You believe that?" He finally looked at me. "This isn't personal. We just need a more experienced team." "But I found the discrepancy." "And we're grateful," he said, which somehow made it worse. I walked out of that office with my spine straight and my heart in pieces. From that moment on, I stopped trying to be part of the family business, but I never stopped watching. The fire crackled gently in the marble hearth, casting soft orange light across the formal dining room. My father had resumed his seat, now with a glass of scotch replacing his wine. His expression was unreadable, not smug, not apologetic, just steady, as if the storm of reactions from earlier had passed, and now it was time for formalities. He cleared his throat. "As of this morning, Calderon Development has transferred a $10 million deposit into escrow." The air shifted. Monica actually leaned forward, as if trying to physically catch the words before they vanished. "10 million?" she echoed. Kyle whistled softly. "That's impressive." Dad nodded. "It's part of the total purchase agreement. 40 million, paid in 3 structured installments." Kyle sat up straighter. His calculating tone returned. "And how's that being divided?" Dad didn't blink. "It's not." Silence. Then Kyle laughed, short, incredulous. "Wait. What?" "You heard me," Dad replied, voice still calm. "Your mother and I are retaining the full amount." Monica's smile froze in place like bad Botox. "Surely you don't mean all of it?" "We do," my mother said, finally speaking up, though her voice was soft, eyes still on her plate. Kyle's laugh died instantly. "You're kidding. You're actually cutting us out." "This isn't cutting you out," Dad said. "It's giving us our due." 40 million, Kyle barked. "You're retiring on $40 million and giving your kids nothing after everything we've done for this family?" I kept my eyes on my wine glass, gently turning the stem between my fingers. "You built nothing," Dad replied, his tone still controlled. "You weren't involved. You didn't offer to help, to learn, to lead. You stayed on the sidelines. Monica scoffed. Kyle gave up a whole real estate career for this family. He worked remotely 2 hours a week, I said quietly, surprising myself. All heads turned to me. Kyle's eyes narrowed. Excuse me? I looked up at him, calm and unshaken. You gave up nothing, Kyle. You showed up late to meetings, missed payroll calls, and pushed off client updates to interns. I know. I used to schedule them. Kyle's face turned red. Oh, look, the accountant speaks. Monica joined in with a thin smile. Isabel, no offence, but you typed numbers into spreadsheets. That doesn't mean you understand legacy wealth or equity structures. It was almost funny how confident she was. Dad shifted in his seat. That's enough, he said, but I raised a hand. No, it's fine, I said, voice steady. Let them talk. They've been talking for years. I've gotten good at listening. Kyle leaned forward, elbows on the table. You don't know what it takes to manage a sale like this, Isabel. You're just the numbers girl. You probably didn't even understand the terms of the Calderone deal. I tilted my head slightly. Is that so? Monica waved a hand. She probably thinks escrow is a furniture brand. I smiled. This wasn't the time to correct them. Not yet. Not here. Because I'd played my role perfectly. They wanted me invisible. Overlooked. Undervalued, a ghost in the family legacy. So that's exactly what I became. And while they were busy talking over each other, shouting about fairness, equity, and what they thought they deserved, I had already taken the one thing they never thought I'd touch, the company. I took one final sip of wine, set the glass down gently, and wiped the corners of my mouth with my napkin. Then I looked across the table and said, I do have one small question about Calderon development. The room froze. Dad looked up, puzzled. Kyle narrowed his eyes. Monica stopped mid-scroll on her phone. Even my mother shifted in her seat. What about them? Dad asked carefully. I reached down beside my chair and retrieved my laptop bag. From it, I pulled out my slim silver MacBook, flipped it open on the table, and typed a few quick keystrokes. The screen lit up with a clean, dark blue presentation slide. Across the top, it read, Calderon Development, Legal Ownership and Corporate Structure. I did some due diligence of my own, I said, voice calm, measured. Just wanted to understand the background of the firm buying our family's legacy. Dad furrowed his brow, but nodded slowly. Okay. With a tap, I moved to the next slide. A corporate structure chart appeared, Calderon Development at the top, with a box labelled Wholly Owned Subsidiary, leading down to another entity. Interesting thing, I continued. Calderon isn't an independent company. It's a holding. Technically, it's owned in full by Alameda Ventures LLC. Monica's brow furrowed. Kyle looked confused, but tried to hide it. So, he said. Plenty of firms operate that way. I nodded. True. What's more interesting is Alameda Ventures registration documents, which I pulled from the Texas Business Records site this morning. Another slide. There it was. Registered agent and managing member, Isabel R. Rowland. Kyle stared at the screen, then turned toward me like he was trying to see a trick in the projection. That's not real. I turned the laptop so they could all see it clearly. The state seal, the registration number, the digital timestamp, all real, all official. I founded Alameda Ventures 3 years ago, I said, addressing my father directly now, and I formed Calderon as a vehicle specifically designed to acquire mid-sized construction companies with strong reputations and poor succession planning. The room was silent. A long, breathless silence. Kyle finally broke it with a disbelieving snort. You're joking. You made that logo in Canva or something. This is some prank. I looked at him flatly. Would you like to verify it yourself? I can send you the EIN. The LLC documentation is public. Monica leaned closer to the screen, lips slightly parted. Wait a minute. This is real. It is, I said. And this morning, Calderon Development placed a $10 million deposit into escrow to purchase Rowland Builders. The remaining $30 million will be transferred upon finalization next quarter.
Dad looked like he'd forgotten how to blink. You bought my company? No, I said gently. I'm buying it. It's not final yet. I wanted to go through the same due diligence process as any other professional buyer would. Kyle slammed his palm on the table. This is insane. You've been planning this behind our backs? I've been building this since you were still trying to get verified on social media, I replied. But I didn't do it behind your backs. I just did it quietly, because none of you were ever listening. Mum whispered, Isabel. I moved to Dallas to study commercial real estate, I continued, got my MBA, started consulting for development firms, then I built Alameda Ventures, acquired 2 concrete suppliers and a renovation firm before Calderon. I've been preparing for this. Monica looked at Dad. She's serious. Richard, she's been preparing for this. Kyle turned to me, face red. You can't just swoop in and buy the family name. I tilted my head. Isn't that exactly what you were hoping to do, Kyle, except without knowing anything about how it worked? Dad hadn't spoken. His eyes were fixed on the screen, jaw tight, mind visibly spinning. Monica finally sat back, muttering to herself, This changes everything. Yes, it did. The silence that followed was thick and brittle, like glass under tension, ready to shatter with the wrong word. I closed the laptop quietly and folded my hands in front of me. It's not just a sale, I said finally. It's a preservation. Roland Builders won't disappear. It'll expand, under Calderon's umbrella, under my guidance. Dad looked at me, truly looked, for the first time not as the daughter he once dismissed, but as the woman who now sat across from him, holding the fate of his life's work in her hands. Dad still hadn't said a word. He sat rigid in his chair, hands clasped on the table like a general in a war room who just realised he'd overlooked an entire flank. His scotch sat untouched. The colour in his face had gone pale, not from anger, but from something deeper. Recognition. And something else. Worry. I let the silence hang just long enough before opening my laptop again. There's one more thing I'd like to clarify before dessert. Kyle threw up his hands. Oh, fantastic, here comes the victory lap. I ignored him. A new slide appeared on the screen. Alameda Ventures, ownership breakdown. At the top, beneath the company name, was a pie chart. 78% Isabel R. Rowland, 22% minority investment partners, confidential. I own 78% of Alameda Ventures outright, I said, my tone still steady but firmer now. Which means I control Calderon, which means the decision to acquire Roland Builders is mine and mine alone. Monica stared at the screen like it had insulted her. That's not possible. I built the firm over 6 years, I continued. Slowly, deliberately, with my own capital, from clients I earned, from projects I led, from the industry connections none of you ever thought I could make. Kyle laughed again, but it was brittle now. You're playing Monopoly, Isabel. This is real business. I looked at him calmly. Then maybe you should have taken it seriously before someone else did. Dad finally stirred. His voice was low. You own the company that's buying mine? I nodded. Yes. And I've been evaluating Roland Builders for the past 14 months, under complete anonymity, the same way I've evaluated every other acquisition. You passed every benchmark. You should be proud. But why? He asked, voice raw. Why do it this way? Why not tell me? Because I didn't want a favour, I said. I didn't want it gifted to me because I was your daughter. I wanted to prove I could earn it and offer you full value for it. He looked down at the table, shaken in a way I'd never seen. But there's more, I said. Kyle groaned. Oh, for what now? I moved to the final slide. It showed an aerial view of our neighbourhood. On the edge of the Rowland Builders property line was a rectangular plot of land, the old lumber yard, abandoned for years, tucked behind a rusting chain-link fence. It was outlined in bold blue. Underneath it read, "Pending acquisition, Alameda Ventures." Dad sat up straighter, his eyes locked on the screen. "I believe this is the parcel you've been negotiating privately," I said. "Your retirement project, a boutique commercial strip, if I'm not mistaken." His mouth opened slightly. How do you know that?" I met his gaze. "Because Alameda Ventures is 2 days away from closing on it." Kyle looked at me, then at Dad. "You mean she's buying your other property too?" "I didn't even list it," Dad muttered. "I was in early discussions, just preliminary." "You went through Red Rock Commercial," I said. "Their junior broker posted the property as pre-development interest only on a public board for less than 24 hours. I made an offer within 6. Dad was speechless. "That parcel connects directly to Rowland Builders' south exit," I continued, "which makes it ideal for a logistics expansion or a commercial mixed-use pivot. I'm planning the latter." You knew what I was planning?" he asked, almost in awe. "I watched," I said softly. "All these years, I paid attention, I learned, and while you were preparing for retirement, I was preparing to build something new with your foundation." He leaned back, processing the weight of everything. It was then I realized the man who never thought I was cut out for this now had nothing left to say, because the daughter he forgot to watch had become the woman he couldn't ignore. I waited for the tension to settle, or at least condense into something more manageable than the raw disbelief still hanging in the air. Then I clicked to the next slide. The title was simple, Project Evergrande, Financial Anomalies, 2017. Dad looked up sharply. "Evergrande?" Kyle's jaw tensed. Monica glanced at him, confused. "Is that one of your developments?" I zoomed in on the spreadsheet now filling the screen. Columns of numbers stretched across, highlighted in red and yellow. Below them a summary in clear, bold font. Discrepancy identified, $592,150. Date of occurrence, FY 2017, Q2 to Q4. Authorized project lead, Kyle Rowland. "This," I said calmly, "is from the year I was pulled off accounting, the same year Kyle assumed lead oversight of our residential expansion trial. Codename Evergrande." Kyle's voice came sharp, fast. "That wasn't even a finalized project. It was in pre-approval. You pushed the budget through with Dad's signature. But then you reallocated funds, slowly, across 3 quarters. Reimbursed vendors for services never rendered. Initiated duplicate line items. Used shell invoice numbers. Sloppy work, really." He stood up. "That's ridiculous." I didn't flinch. "I have original invoices, bank reconciliation files, even time-stamped approval routing logs from the old SharePoint. You weren't careful." "You're twisting numbers," Kyle hissed. Dad turned to him. "Is that true?" Kyle's eyes darted. "Of course not. Isabel's been harboring resentment for years. She's just trying to sabotage me because..." "Because what?" I asked. "Because I finally had enough of watching you bleed the company dry while pretending to be some golden heir?" Kyle turned red. "You're insane." Monica finally spoke, voice cautious. "Wait, is this why you were removed from accounting, Isabel?" I met her gaze. "The day I sent a confidential report to Dad about a $170,000 mismatch between vendor payouts and project logs was the same day I was told I wasn't a good fit for internal financial oversight. The real reason I got sidelined wasn't personality, it was proximity to Kyle's mess." Dad swallowed hard, looking like someone had just pulled a rug out from beneath him. "You never told me that," he said. "You didn't want to hear it," I said. "You wanted someone to blame quietly, so you picked me." And Kyle got to continue, unchecked. Kyle slammed his palm on the table again. "You're lying!" "I'm presenting data," I said. He shook his head wildly. "There's no proof. You can't tie that directly to me. I clicked once more. Up came scanned approval emails from Kyle's account, with timestamps, approval signatures, one even forwarded from his personal Gmail. Dad leaned in to look. His eyes scanned the text, then scanned it again, then turned slowly to Kyle. You told me Evergrande failed because of city permit issues, he said quietly. Kyle looked like a trapped animal. It got messy. The city stalled the inspection. Isabel's making it look worse than it. $500,000 disappeared, I interrupted, and we never developed the site. You let the land depreciate and walked away. Kyle glared at me. You think you're the hero, coming in with your spreadsheets and your smug face? No, I said simply. I think I'm the one who finally cleaned up. Dad was still staring at the screen, stunned. I closed the laptop. I'm not doing this to humiliate you, I said, quieter now. I'm doing it because someone needed to. This isn't revenge, it's accountability. Kyle laughed bitterly. Please, you've waited your whole life for this moment. You're wrong, I said. I waited 10 years. 10 years hoping someone else, Dad, the board, even you, would handle it. You didn't, so now I am. Monica folded her arms. What, you want applause? You want to buy the company and air the family's dirty laundry in front of us? No, I said. I want to rebuild what matters. You want to see it as vengeance. That's your lens. But me? I see this as restoration. Dad finally spoke. And what happens now? I looked at him, my voice softening. Now? We stop pretending. We stop rewarding dysfunction. And we start protecting the name you spent 3 decades building. He nodded slowly. And you really believe this is the way? I do, I said. Because I'm not here to punish anyone. I'm here to fix what you didn't know was broken. Kyle's voice came low, bitter. So what now? We're just outsiders? I turned my gaze to him, steady. You were never really in. He flinched, the words cutting deeper than I intended. Monica sat stiffly beside him, her arms crossed, lips pressed tight. She hadn't spoken since the last bomb dropped, not because she had nothing to say, but because her calculations were finally collapsing. We're your family, Kyle said, eyes burning. How could you do this to us? I set my laptop aside and leaned forward. You think this is about exclusion? It's not. It's about who showed up, when it counted. Monica snapped. You act like we never cared. We came to family dinners. We checked in. You came for holidays and left before cleanup, I said. You showed up for champagne, not for scaffolding, for ribbon cuttings, not project delays, for credit, not construction. Kyle stared, jaw clenched. That's not fair. No, I said. What's not fair is pretending I wasn't trying to help, until I wasn't allowed to anymore. He blinked. What do you mean? I inhaled slowly, then spoke with the clarity of someone who had waited years to be understood. Do you remember the land parcel on Addison Creek, the empty one near the freight corridor? Kyle nodded slowly. Yeah, Dad said no one wanted it. Too narrow for development. Poor drainage. I smiled faintly. He said that to me too, when I asked if I could purchase it. Kyle frowned. Wait, that lot? I nodded. It was the first thing I bought when I was pushed out. I offered to buy it from Dad. He laughed and told me I'd go bankrupt in 6 months. So I waited until it went back on the market, then made the purchase quietly. That land became the cornerstone of Alameda Ventures. Dad's eyes widened. That's where you built? Yes, I said. That was the foundation of my first development deal. I partnered with a logistics firm, developed a flex space warehouse project, and turned a profit in 14 months. Kyle shook his head slowly, like he couldn't decide whether to be angry or awed. So that's where it all started. That's where you all stopped watching, I said. When I stopped being part of the family business, I started building my own. Monica broke her silence. But you didn't tell us. Would you have listened? I asked. Every time I brought up numbers or zoning or site plans, you changed the subject, made jokes, said I was cute for trying to play with the big boys. So I stopped trying to convince you, and I started proving it to myself. Kyle leaned back, his expression unreadable. I looked at him, softer now. This isn't about punishing you, Kyle. It's about reclaiming the space you all told me I didn't deserve. He didn't speak, just stared at the plate in front of him, still full, untouched, cold now. Dad was still quiet, watching, processing. You told me no, I said, voice directed at him now, when I asked to come back, when I offered to help after the Evergrande mess. You said I was too emotional for leadership, too analytical for site work. You said I'd fail. I was protecting you, he said quietly. No, I replied. You were projecting onto me. The room stilled again. I straightened, voice calm. But I didn't fail. I built something. Not out of revenge, out of necessity, out of belief in myself. And now I'm not here to take your place. I'm here to offer you something better than inheritance. Continuity. I looked around the table, gauging the silence. Then I exhaled and said, There's one more thing you should all know. Monica gave a dry laugh. Of course there is. Dad's brows furrowed, waiting. Kyle just looked exhausted now, not defeated, but like a man finally realizing the room was spinning without him. I didn't just disappear, I said, back when everything fell apart. When Evergrande collapsed and I was told to leave accounting, I didn't just walk away. Dad looked puzzled. But you never came to me. Yes, I did, I said quietly. Just not directly. He blinked. I don't understand. I turned toward Mum. You remember the brown folder I handed you? I asked gently. 5 years ago. I gave it to you after that Christmas dinner. I said, this is important. Please make sure Dad sees it. Do you remember? Her eyes didn't meet mine. Dad looked at her, then back at me. What was in the folder? My business plan, I said. The early version of Alameda Ventures. Market analysis, risk projections, funding proposals, everything I'd worked on for nearly a year. Dad's face paled slightly. I never saw it. I know, I said. The room went still. I followed up once, I added. Asked Mom a week later if you'd said anything. She told me you'd reviewed it and didn't think it was worth discussing, that it was too risky, too ambitious, so I stopped asking. Dad turned sharply to Mom. You told her I said that? Mum still wouldn't look up. Her fork hovered above her untouched green beans like time had stopped mid-meal. Claire, Dad said more firmly, did you even give it to me? No answer. Silence thickened. Even Monica stopped breathing for a second. Kyle looked from face to face, unsure whether to smirk or explode. I found it later, I continued, 3 months afterward, stuffed in the bottom drawer of the mudroom desk, still sealed. That broke something. Dad's face fell. You're saying I never stopped trying, I said. You just never got the chance to see it, because it was never delivered. He turned again to Mum, softer now. Why? Still no answer. I don't want to fight, I said, breaking the tension. I'm not telling you this to start a war. I need you to know. I didn't vanish because I gave up. I vanished because I wasn't allowed to try. Kyle was watching Mum now too, but with something closer to suspicion than sadness. I always thought you weren't ambitious enough, he muttered. That's the story everyone liked better, I replied. It made it easier to pretend I wasn't in the room. Finally Dad spoke, voice lower than before. Isabel, if I'd seen that proposal. You might have shut me down, I said gently. But maybe not. I'll never know, because the person who was supposed to believe in me first didn't. Mum's hands were shaking, but she still hadn't spoken. Dad leaned back, taking it all in. And I could see the years pile up on his face. All the missed chances, the misunderstood silences, the weight of a legacy left half told. I didn't buy Roland Builders to win, I said, bringing my voice back to clarity. I bought it to preserve what should have been preserved the first time, not the assets, the values. No one moved. I'm not here to take something from this family, I added. I'm here to stop it from falling apart again. 6 weeks after the dinner that changed everything, the company that once defined my family was unrecognisable. And that was exactly the point. Roland Builders hadn't vanished. It had been rebuilt from its core, structure intact, vision renewed. The first thing I did as CEO was remove the hierarchy that kept good people quiet and promoted loyalty over performance. Project leads were now evaluated by results, not family trees. Financial transparency wasn't just encouraged, it was mandatory. I didn't march in waving banners or rebranding the place in my name. In fact, the name Roland Builders stayed, not because it honoured us, but because it honoured the crew who showed up every day, rain or shine, for decades. The new mission was clear: build better, inside and out. Monica surprised everyone, including herself, when she declined a corporate title. Instead, she approached me with a proposal 2 weeks after the acquisition. She wanted to start a boutique branding agency focused on real estate and development. I don't want a favour, she said, her voice unusually sincere. I want to pitch. So she did. She showed up to the Alameda offices with a 5-slide pitch deck and a handcrafted mock-up of rebranding concepts for our underused commercial arm. It wasn't flashy, it was focused, thoughtful, on point. I gave her the first contract that afternoon. We weren't friends, not yet, but we were professionals, and that was a beginning neither of us saw coming. Kyle, on the other hand, took longer to figure out where he belonged, or whether he belonged at all. After the dust settled, he requested a meeting. No suits, no demands. Just him, in jeans, with a notebook full of questions. I know I screwed up, he said without preamble, but I'm not done. I don't want to be. I asked him what he actually wanted, for the first time in years, without assumptions. He paused, then said, I want to learn, for real this time, from the ground up. It didn't mean I forgot what he'd done, but I believed in second chances, earned ones. So I placed him as an assistant site manager on a mid-scale redevelopment in South Austin. No corner office, no last name perks. He reported to a superintendent who didn't care who his father was and gave no special treatment. For the first few days, he didn't talk much. But by the end of week 2, he'd learned how to manage punch lists without delay and negotiate last-minute material deliveries during a supplier strike. He was earning his way. But I made it clear, one slip and he was out. No warnings, no redos. Kyle understood. I didn't do it to punish him. I did it because legacy means nothing without accountability. That was the thing no one ever taught us growing up. For the first time in a long time, Roland Builders wasn't about egos or inheritance. It was about value, real value. The kind you build with your own hands or with your own grit. And me? I didn't watch from afar anymore. I walked job sites. I met with suppliers. I sat in HR interviews and budget meetings and union negotiations. Not because I had to, but because leadership doesn't live in a title. It lives in the trenches. There were days I still felt the ache, the one that comes when you realise how much time was lost to being underestimated. But there was also pride, because now I wasn't proving anything to anyone. I was building something that proved itself. The progress was slow, but it was real. Kyle had lasted longer than I thought he would. 3 months on the job site, working long days, handling real problems. He didn't complain, didn't push back, even managed to earn a little respect from the site crew. But old habits, like termites, don't always make noise until the damage is deep. It started with a routine audit of materials procurement. Nothing unusual. A quarterly check-in I personally insisted on since the acquisition. My assistant flagged an anomaly. A $92,000 invoice from a mid-tier supplier for steel reinforcements that weren't scheduled to arrive until 6 weeks later. The numbers didn't make sense. The project didn't need that volume of steel. The supplier wasn't on our approved vendor list. And the invoice had been rushed through without proper multi-signature review. It had Kyle's initials on it. I didn't jump to conclusions. I requested the signed contracts. I called the supplier myself. I reviewed every line item. Then I sent a request for a one-on-one meeting with Kyle. He arrived with a hard hat under his arm and a confident half smile, the same one he used to wear at Thanksgiving dinners, before he understood how much I'd grown. I didn't waste time. "This invoice," I said, pushing the papers across the table. "Explain it." He glanced at it, tried to play it off. "Standard bulk pre-order. Prices are rising." "Don't," I said flatly. "We're locked in with our preferred supplier for this job, and they confirmed we didn't authorize a secondary bulk order." Kyle hesitated. "It was a strategic hedge. If prices spike—" "Don't lie to me." His mouth shut. I stared at him for a long moment. "You were doing so well." "I needed the margin," he said finally, his voice low. "The branding firm Monica launched, it's been rough. We've been behind on mortgage payments. I thought I could skim off just a bit, make it back later. You'd never notice." "I noticed," I said coldly. He didn't look at me. I opened my desk drawer and placed 2 envelopes on the table. "One is a resignation letter I've already drafted on your behalf," I said. "You sign it, walk away quietly, and this ends here." He looked at the other envelope. "And that? A formal report to the DA, wire fraud, falsifying invoices, breach of fiduciary responsibility. This won't just get you fired, it'll get you indicted." His face drained of colour. "Kyle, you already got 1 second chance," I said, more quietly now. "I won't give you a third. Choose." He reached for the first envelope. He didn't say anything, he just signed it. Later that day, as word spread among the upper staff, I expected Dad to call me. I braced for it, for the lecture, the disappointment, the inevitable argument about how I was too harsh or didn't understand the weight of family. But instead, he showed up at my office. No appointment, no warning. He stood in the doorway, holding his old coffee mug like he used to during Monday morning project briefings. The ones I wasn't allowed to attend growing up. "I heard what happened," he said. I nodded. He made his choice. Dad came in slowly. He looked tired, more from age than shock. I thought, if I gave him a chance, he'd learn, change. I hoped the same. He was quiet for a moment. Then he set the mug down and looked at me with a gravity I'd never seen in his eyes before. "You didn't just save this company," he said. "You saved our name." I blinked. "You were right," he continued. "You tried to warn me years ago. I didn't listen, but you never stopped trying. And when we shut you out, you still found a way to protect what mattered." His voice caught slightly. "You're not just a leader, Isabel. You're the only one who's ever carried the Rowland name with honour, without asking for anything in return." I didn't respond right away, because in that moment something shifted, not just in him, in me. For the first time I wasn't fighting to be seen. I was standing exactly where I belonged. The ballroom was filled with people in dress shirts, polished boots, and calloused hands. A blend of project managers, site leads, accountants, and subcontractors who, until recently, had never all stood under the same banner. Tonight, they did. The gold-embossed signage read, "Alameda Rowland," a celebration of what we're building together. It was the first company event under the merged name. Not a gala, not a flashy investor soiree, just a celebration. For the people who'd kept the lights on, the concrete poured, and the contracts honoured. I stood near the stage, scanning the room. There were rows of buffet tables, a modest open bar, a jazz trio in the corner. The budget wasn't extravagant, but the feeling in the air, it was earned. Monica sat at a round table near the front, hair swept into a loose chignon,
laughing softly with 2 junior designers from her agency. Her smile was calm, not forced, the kind of smile that comes after chaos, when you finally find your footing. We hadn't talked much since Kyle left, but she'd stayed, delivered on every branding promise, proved she wasn't just attached to a name. She wanted to build something too. When I stepped on stage, the jazz faded out. I didn't have a script, just a folded note in my pocket, and a pulse steady from the weight of everything behind me. "Thank you," I began. Not just for being here tonight, but for showing up every day, even when things were uncertain, especially then. A few heads nodded. One of the older site supervisors raised his glass. When I took over Roland Builders, I continued, I didn't want to tear it down. I wanted to build on it, not just the name, the integrity, the grit, the people. More nods now. Some of you have been with this company longer than I've been in steel-toed boots. Some of you came with Alameda, and some of you weren't sure what either name meant until the work spoke for itself. That got a few chuckles. I paused. We often talk about legacy as something handed down, I said. But I want to talk about something different tonight, something I've learnt the hard way. I looked out at the rows of faces, some curious, some already understanding. Earned legacy, the kind you don't inherit but build. One blueprint, one broken nail gun, one bid at a time. The kind that isn't given in a will, but shaped through resilience, integrity, and showing up when no one's watching. A few claps, a few held breaths. I wasn't invited to the table when decisions were made, I said, so I built my own table, my own chair, my own company, and tonight I invite all of you to sit with me, not because of who you know, but because of what you do. The room erupted in applause, not wild, but deeply grounded, the kind that comes from people who know how much work weighs per ton. Off stage, Dad stood in the back corner. He wasn't in a tux. Just a charcoal suit and an old tie he used to wear when signing contracts. He met my gaze, gave one short nod, the kind that meant I see you now. But one chair was empty, the one that would have been my mother's. I hadn't invited her, not out of malice, but because this space was earned, and she'd never once stepped into the work it took to make it. I turned my attention back to the crowd. Tonight wasn't about who hadn't shown up, it was about who had and who never stopped. The party ended just before midnight. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the street was quiet, the air heavy with the kind of Texas humidity that clings to your skin like memory. The porch light flicked on automatically as I stepped inside. Same house, same creaky hallway. But everything felt different now. Not because the house had changed, but because I had. I walked into the dining room, set down my bag, and paused in front of the old oak table. It had seen better years. Scratch marks from moving days, candle wax stains from birthdays, the faded watering where Mom used to set her sweet tea. But what drew my eye was the chair at the end, the one I used to sit in, or rather the one I was never really invited to sit in. Growing up, family dinners had a script. Dad at the head, Kyle next to him, Mum closest to the kitchen, me somewhere between being useful and being ignored. That chair, the empty one, was a symbol of all the places I wasn't welcomed, all the meetings I wasn't called into, all the decisions made as if I wasn't there. And tonight, after everything, after the acquisition, the twists, the unravelling, I found myself standing in front of that chair with something in my hand. A letter, not printed, not typed, just handwritten in pen on cream stationery. It had no date, no greeting, just 3 lines. I don't need your apology. I just need to be seen, truly, finally seen. I'd written it months ago, before the buyout, before Kyle's resignation, before Dad told me I was the only one who'd carried the family name with honour. I'd meant to give it to Mum, or maybe just leave it in that drawer in the mudroom, the one where she'd hidden my first business plan. I thought maybe she'd find this one too, one day.
But standing here now, I knew I didn't need to send it. I didn't need her eyes to validate what mine had always seen. With a slow breath, I tore the letter in half. Then again. The pieces fluttered into the wastebasket, like old confetti from a party no one remembered. I turned away from the table and walked to my office. On the desk was a folder, thick, colour-coded, marked with a label in bold. Initiative, Project Blueprint. Inside were plans to launch a new branch under Alameda Rowland, a training and mentorship division. Programs designed specifically for young women interested in construction, engineering and development, workshops, scholarships, on-site internships, trade school partnerships, leadership development, everything I had once wished existed for me, everything no one had thought to build because no one believed someone like me would need it. But I wasn't building it for me. I was building it for the next girl who got told to stay in the kitchen while the men talked money. For the girl asked to take notes instead of lead. For the girl sent to accounting when she belonged in the boardroom or on the job site with steel in her hands and strategy in her bones. The final page of the proposal held the mission statement, written in bold type. We don't wait for a seat at the table, we build the whole damn hall. I picked it up, smiled, and whispered to the empty room, "This is the legacy I choose."